At this time, we will open a specially arranged meeting of the Carver Conservation Commission for a question about transferring some funds to the town from Conservation Commission. Okay. So I guess this is a... do we have a presentation for this? I see documents for the past, but...
He's going to give it.
Michael's going to... Okay, we might have something in writing.
He's the presentator.
Ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. And Brooke, condolences for you and your family, and thank you for showing up. And I didn't expect you here, but I'm happy to see you're healthy and everything. With me is also our Finance Director, Meg LeMay. And what we're here to talk about tonight is the fund that was established in 2002 to set aside funds for the Conservation Commission to purchase land for the purpose of conservation areas. And what I'd like to do is to try to describe the history to the best of our ability that we can resurrect from documents and kind of lay this out as to what had happened. First, let's go back to 2002. In 2002, the town had no financial policies that had any type of reserve set up. At that time, I'm not even sure the CPC was fully established at that time. I think it was in its infancy or just about ready to be created, so there's no funds in a CPC fund to collect taxes, to collect money from. There was certainly no capital plan or capital and debt stabilization plan that currently exists right now with our 10-year forecast of capital that spends, approximately $2 million a year just on new capital projects in addition to debt that it has every year. So again, it was a different time, different era, and different assumptions. Also at that time, there were no solar projects to speak of, and nor were any solar projects being built on bog land at the time because it wasn't allowed to be done until Mike Paddock's was the first one in the state that was done, whatever that was, about 6 years ago. So again, that's the time frame that we're talking about when this was put together. When it was put together, there was a bill that was passed called a Home Rule petition that went to the State House. Now, before I get into that, a Conservation Commission is allowed to establish a conservation fund under Chapter 40, Section 8C, for use by the Conservation Commission. And in my experience, pretty much every Conservation Commission in the state sets up that fund. Normally, that fund is supported and paid for predominantly from fees, that you get the fees from when somebody comes in and files a permit for you. Half the fees go to the state, half the fees come to the town, and the town funds are put into that fund. And it allows the board to utilize those funds for conservation purposes, whether that is to hire additional experts to come in and look at conservation issues, whether it is, attorney calling me for the town, he'll have to wait. Whether it is to go out and do an analysis on a piece of property that the town may want to purchase, or if there's some funds available to purchase property, it can be done that way. Again, that's a typical thing, and we're not really talking about that at all. That's typical. So in 2002, the town meeting voted under Article 48 to establish that. At the same time, it also authorized to put $20,000 from free cash in there to seed the fund. So that's again, we're in 2002, $20,000. Town didn't really have strong financial policies, a CPC, a capital and debt stabilization fund. This was the only vehicle that was foreseen to acquire conservation land. In addition to that, the town also voted a home rule petition that went to the state and was adopted by the state and signed by the governor on January 1st, 2003. And what that did was additional funds beyond what I just said to supplement the town's conservation funds. And what it says is withdrawal penalty taxes and rollback taxes, tax collected by the town under Chapter 61, 61A, and 61B of the general laws shall be deposited in the conservation fund of the town and used for the purchase of land. So two things happened here. Is that the second thing is that it narrowed what these new funds could be used for, which is only purchase of land. So your conservation fund allows you guys to do other things. The money that was put in here from these rollback taxes was only for the purchase of land. Now, tied into the purchase of land, technically you can do an appraisal. You can do legal costs tied into the purchase of land. So any direct ancillary cost to purchase of the land would technically fall within the definition of purchase of the land. But you couldn't go out and say, okay, I'm going to go out and build a boardwalk on someplace, or you couldn't go out, I'm going to hire somebody to come in and study the birds and the bees in this particular area, or get a second consultant on something else, which, again, under your normal authority under conservation funds, you can do. So again, it narrowed that. Now, the first piece of this bill was to take the rollback taxes collected from Chapter 61, 61A, and 61B and deposit those into the funds. Again, additional money going into there beyond permit fees. Now, at that time, let's first talk about what the rollback taxes are, is that under state law, everybody's taxed fair and equitably across the board as to what the valuation of the land is. However, if it's for farmland, it's reduced and taxed at a lower level because the state wants to preserve farmland, conservation land, for those purposes. This all started in the dairy farms and all that stuff when it happened. So by reducing that down, the town is losing tax revenue because the town adopted and the town is supporting the Chapter 61 findings or Chapter 61 laws for the reduced piece. If somebody wants to take that out of Chapter 61, normally in 2002, 2005, 2010, a farmer may have taken a couple acres of front land, taken it out of Chapter 61 land, and built a house for his son or daughter on there, or sold off a lot. And it was a small increment of money that was coming in. It wasn't for, at that time you weren't really taking bogs out of chapter land, you were taking ancillary property out of chapter land, and there was some small residual money that was coming in. And a point in time that I want to go to, Meg, when did the fund actually jump up? What was the year, 2016, 17?
So at the beginning of 2015, it starts with a balance of $135,000.
Okay, so let's just stop there for a second. In 2015, 5 years ago, the fund was how much?
$135,000.
$135,000. Today, $616,000 and $36. That's what's in the fund today. So, almost $450,000 more than that actually, that came into the fund in just the last 5 years. Predominantly, that was rollback money from big cranberry bogs that flipped over to solar. So when Paddock did his property here, he had to come back and pay back the 5-year rollback taxes, and that would have gone in there. And everybody since then that's done that. And that's why that's grown so big in the time frame. Now, I want to go back again to the previous decade. After this was approved and signed into law January 1st, 2003, the town ran into a funding issue, surprisingly. And this predominantly was after the 2008 recession. And I know people are talking about the 2008 recession and how this COVID-19 is going to be so much worse than that. So after the 2008 recession, town meeting adopted, because the town needed any money it could to continue operations, it adopted and sent a home rule petition into the state that commencing on January 1st, 2009, again, right after the 2008 piece, that all revenue for a 5-year period that was normally being diverted into this fund would be diverted into the town's stabilization fund. It wouldn't be earmarked for the conservation fund, it would be earmarked for the town fund. And that was to go forward for 5 years, and it did. And then after those 5 years, which is the number Meg just mentioned, again, 2015, then funds roll back into the conservation fund.
Michael, how much money did that end up going into general funds?
Well, here's the thing. We changed software packages, and I don't believe we're able to pull that dollar amount
You're
out.
saying the general stabilization.
The general stabilization?
That's not the general fund, it's the stabilization
Stabil-
fund,
yes.
it's the trust fund.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, so none of it went to the general fund. It
No,
closed up
right
the
now, but
fund.
how much went to the stabilization fund?
Again, that's gonna be a
Yeah.
tough, because there's the period of time where the server that had my own financial software died, we can't retrieve it, so.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
If I
it was all properly accounted for at the
Yeah, I
time.
know,
It's
it's
all in
just-
audits. It's just that we can't retrieve that documentation without,
Okay.
you know,
I just-
spending a week pulling out old records that are archived.
Yeah,
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, that's where I included in the packet that I sent to everyone, the email from Meg, because I had asked the same question, where did this $135,000 come from? And that was all the money that was put into this account from its inception until they switched over to the new software. All we had was a number. She could not go back and tell us how much got put in per year. So it would be safe to say that the $135,000, even without putting money into the account for a period of 5 years, still grew to $135,000. So, and then you add to it the 480, which is the accounting we have with the new software version. So that's how we get to the 616.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have a question.
Yes.
um, For Meg, actually. Just so I'm tracking this, we've been talking about conservation land acquisition fund, but then also in the description of this history, there's a conservation fund. I'm to understand they're two separate funds, correct?
so, well, there's the wetlands account.
Wetlands fund,
That's
right.
a special revenue account, that money comes from, the notice of
From the
intent.
filing
Fees.
fees, like half the town and half the state filing fees.
Yeah, when-
The DEP gets, yeah,
So that's the wetlands fund?
yep, when
Yeah.
someone files a notice of intent, yep.
Okay.
And that one has been steadily growing over the years.
Yeah.
And there's been no drawdowns on it, so that one, yeah.
Sure.
No, we have used drawdowns for small things.
Small things,
Yeah,
yeah.
like
That's right.
MACC dues,
The,
you
the
know, a consultant.
Books, the wetlands books that we got, remember?
Yeah, the plaques are
Yeah.
little signs, stuff like that.
Right.
So there technically is no conservation trust fund from I mean, we're calling that on our documentation here, but that's not the real name. The real name by the legislation used the same name, which is the conservation fund. So everything goes into that one fund, the conservation fund. We just, because money comes in here, it's easier for accounting just to put the word trust in, because they know it's a one-source type thing, is how they have it there. But it's not, there's not two funds. There is the wetlands fund, but then there's the conservation fund that this money that I'm talking to goes into.
The land acquisition fund?
Correct.
Okay.
Because what it says here is in the article, if you look at this piece, which was the approval, it says in the second line, shall be deposited in the conservation fund of the town and used for the purchase of land. That's it. Again, which is further restrictive than just what the conservation fund normally allows for you that you can do. So, all right, so now we're in 2015, and this temporary moratorium lifts. And, you know, I do have one printout here. It's a double-page document. You probably have this. You see in there payments of $94,000 in June 30th of 2015. You see another payment in 12/31/2017 of $127,000. On the back, you see another payment of $43,000, $74,000, $51,000, $28,000. And in those few years, 5 years, you know, 4 years, you've got $480,000 And again, you see a couple small numbers in here, but the bigger numbers were solar projects that were done. You know, Makepeace did many large solar projects in town that were all under their 61 finding. That's where the big numbers are coming from, that's in there. So that was never anticipated when this whole thing started, because you couldn't build solar projects on cranberry bogs at the time. So, all right, so that brings us to 2015. Now, let me talk about 2015, or let me talk about 2015 or 2020 compared to 2002. I am a strong supporter and believe that there should always be, the town should always have the ability to buy open space, recreation, conservation land for the right purposes in the town. And, you know, as I've talked to members on this board, you know, at some point, we want to continue to buy property in the old Cedar Swamp and try to turn that into a complete park. And we were able to, through tax title and land of low value, acquire a bunch of that property this year. I've been a proponent of trying to purchase one of the 3 or 4 lots that were created from the old Eldridge estate right on Sampson Pond. You know, if we can not have 4 houses, but only have 3, and the town's able to buy some more beachfront there for everybody to use, that's a good use of funds. Unfortunately, that got politicized. So there is a need for the town to have that, but what I would argue is that from 2002, when there were no other options, today in 2020 or 2015, the town has options. And those options do require a town meeting vote, and my belief is for any type of sizable purchase over $100,000, that it should be made by town meeting. And those funds are available from 3 sources today in addition to this fund. If this fund didn't exist, and I'm going to use the Sampson Pond property, and I came forward with a proposal to buy one of the lots, and let's say they wanted to sell one of the lots to us for $125,000. What I would, and this fund didn't exist, what I would propose to do is, you know, with conservation support, with planning board support, with FinCom support, with the Board of Selectmen support, is we'd go to town meeting and purchase that property, and we'd use 1 of 3 sources to do it. One source would just be the General Stabilization Fund. We put money aside for special things that are one-time events, i.e. we're in that one-time event right now with COVID-19. But if there was a unique purchase that was good for the entire town meeting could approve money to come out of that. The second item is our capital and debt stabilization plan, you know, where we spend a couple $1 million a year, and we have a 10-year plan for that. If there was some sensitive property that the town felt it should buy, it could be funded out of that. Again, it takes a town meeting vote. And the third source is always CPC, because CPC, you know, has the ability of buying open space and preserving it as open space. I did hear one person say, well, you can use this land and buy land and then build housing on it. No. Going back to the law that was passed, you know, use to purchase land that is for conservation purposes. You can't buy land for housing, you buy for conservation purposes. You can't buy open space out of the CPC and use it for housing. You know, I guess technically you could buy land out of the General Stabilization Fund or the Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund and then have town meeting authorizes to build housing on. I don't think that's likely, but technically I guess you could do that if you wanted to. So, you know, again, part of the analysis here is that times change. The situation in 2002 is different than what it was in 2015, and certainly different than it was in 2020. And where this made sense back then to set up the fund, because there was no other sources, now you have other opportunities. And again, 3 other different sources that are there. So what I am here asking for, and after I ask for that, I just have one more additional comment, just talking about our current economic affairs, is for 2 votes. And I'm asking for 1 vote tonight, and if you want to take the second vote tonight, that's fine too, or it can be tabled to another time. The first vote is that currently right now you have $616,036 in the account. And I do think it's important for you to always have some money in your conservation account. And what I would be requesting a vote for is for you to take the lead and authorizing that, given the state of the world, the state of the town, the state of multiple sources of buying conservation land, and any large purchase should go through town meeting, that you would support releasing $500,000 of that 616 to go into the general stabilization of the town, which still requires town meeting to reallocate that in an emergency session. So that's the first vote. The second vote is that, again, not asking you to do this tonight, but if you want to, that's okay too, is to, kind of relook at this and say, you know what? Given the amount of money that's coming in here, we would rather have these rollback taxes annually be put into the general stabilization fund, so they're reserved, and it takes a 2/3 vote at town meeting to buy something in the future. So that we, as the Conservation Commission, we've got some seed money at $116,000 plus whatever else comes forward, to then, work with the planning board, the finance committee, and everybody else to say, okay, we want to purchase this additional piece of property, and we could go to the town meeting and ask them to purchase that through the general stabilization fund. And I just think that's a better checks and balances, given the amount of money that we're now receiving from large solar projects. In the past, if it was a couple $1,000s here, a couple $1,000s there, well, I'm not really worried about that. But times change, and we don't have, when this was done in 2002, we don't really have proper checks and balances that one would anticipate for good governance that we would have for spending this amount of money. Just with, at this point, it takes 3 people to vote spending $500,000, out of a volunteer board and an appointed board, with no oversight. And so that would be kind of my second vote that I would ask you guys to consider. Again, that one's not as time sensitive, but if you are considering that, we would then add that to the annual town meeting, whenever that's going to be, which is defined right now as 3 weeks after the governor lifts the bill, or lifts the emergency order, for that to go to the townspeople with your recommendation to change that law so that this law that was adopted in 2003, that this just goes to the general stabilization fund, not to the conservation fund. That would be my recommendation from a good governance standpoint. Now, the question you may ask and that I want to address is why now? Why do we have to have a meeting today? And again, thank you for all coming out for that. We're all maintaining our 6 feet distance. Is because we are in a worldwide pandemic. We haven't hit the apex. We don't know what the full implications of this are going to be. But what I can tell you is that revenues are going to be down. Revenues are going to be down on the local level. Revenues are going to be down on the state level. Our budget right now that is proposed to be spent is almost $44 million is our annual budget for the town. Again, just remember that number, $44 million. That's what our annual spend is for the town. Of that money, and here's the next important thing, is that a little over, let's call it $13 million of that number. So basically a quarter of that number, a quarter of our total budget comes from state aid. Now, the state, like the towns, we have to have a balanced budget. So we have to forecast what our revenue is, and we have to have expenses tied into that revenue. And although the government hasn't announced yet, it is likely that in our May and June state aid there may be some cutbacks. Because the state's not receiving revenue. If they don't receive the revenue, they can't give it to the town, so hence there's going to have to be a cutback. The state does have its own rainy day fund, and it's a lot of money that's in there. But the state also has to focus on what the essential services are of the state. Keeping the hospitals up and running, keeping the state police, keeping all public safety up and running, keeping the hospitals going, keeping law and order, keeping all of the medical stuff going. is that they have to, that's their priority. So are they going to release a bunch of that to the towns? One could argue probably not, but we don't know. Now let's go to the town's stabilization account. Now, when I look at the town's existing stabilization account, and again, just to give you some numbers, just so we all know what we're looking at here, is that we have about $3.2 million in our general stabilization today, 3.2. Let's say that you guys support this and we go to the state and the state has to authorize this $500,000 transfer. I'll talk about the logistics of that later. Let's say you do support that. That would put us up from 3.2 to $3.7 million. Through some other initiatives that Meg and I have, we can probably push that up to about $4.1 million. About $4.4 million. I use that number because, again, if you go back to our annual budget of $44 million, that's 10%. So in essence, if no money came into the town, we would have, so $4.4 million sounds like a lot of money. But let's put it in perspective. If you have a budget of $44 million and you got 4.4 and you have, in worst case scenario, there's no revenue coming into the town, you can pay your bills for 1/12 of the year, 10% of the year. That's it. Then you're out of money. So again, we're much better off than many communities because we have, in essence, about 10% of our money in reserves with your transfer here, your support of this transfer. But in a pandemic, who knows how much we're going to need. And I'm going to be talking to the board tomorrow about possible furloughs for employees. Because we have essential employees, the public safety folks, and the support staff that are supporting the public safety, and which are collectively considered essential employees, and then we have non-essential employees. So we're going to be discussing, because we have to discuss, because we don't know what our future revenue sources are going to be, as to potentially what does that mean for this group of employees that are considered non-essential. Do we offer them the ability of going out on furlough? Do we lay them off? We don't want to lay anybody off. We really don't want to put anybody on furlough. But if it makes economic sense to protect the essential part of government, we may have to do that with the intention of hiring these people back when we all get through this, whatever that date is, depending upon what date you believe as to who says that. So again, I'm going back to is, yes, we have money set aside. This will help us get to a 10% number. But it's still probably not enough for a long-term issue. And we don't know, and I know there's people say the economy is going to boom back just in time for the elections in the fall. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think that's going to happen. And what I know from a town standpoint is revenues are going to go longer. Now, the Board of Selectmen voted last week, and they reconfirmed yesterday, that they're, in essence, if a resident or a business has a financial hardship such that it can't pay its bills because it's been laid off or whatever the issue is the town, with that individual or group, sending in a letter to the treasurer collector that says, I've been laid off, I don't have employment, whatever the thing is, I can't pay my bill. They're giving everybody a 60-day grace on penalties and fees for being late on their taxes. Again, you have to ask for that and you have to justify why, but if you do that, you get the waiver. But now keep in mind, by doing that, that's less money coming into the town, which then means we have to tap into some of our savings from a cash flow standpoint to keep the cash going, knowing that we'll eventually collect that minus the fees and penalties. So these are the challenges that we're facing, and the logistics of, if you support the recommendation tonight, would be for the Finance Committee to also opine upon whatever you guys decide, and then to share that with the Board of Selectmen, which we anticipate having a meeting next week. And then from there, submitting that request to the governor and asking the governor to file what's called a governor's bill. You have home rule bill, which is done through town meeting, or you have a governor's bill that's followed through the Board of Selectmen to the governor directly, and he files it with the legislature, to ask the legislature to vote to transfer $500,000 out of this fund and put it into our general stabilization fund. And that could be acted on quickly by the legislature. The reason we have to go with that route is that if we go the other route, which is a home rule petition, A, we have to wait for a town meeting. We don't know when that's going to be. B, after we vote at the town meeting, then that gets sent to the legislature, and that goes through a different path that all these committees and subcommittees have to pass it, and goes, it's like, the old preschool stuff there. How does a bill become a law? I mean, it just goes through that whole process that you have there. So that's the mechanism that we would be pursuing with your support. I did bring this up to the Board of Selectmen last week, and there were some mixed thoughts on this. I don't think anyone was opposed to transferring some of this money out of that, because it is a lot of money, $616,000. I think the rest is a discussion on how should that fund be seated in the future, and how much money should be left in there, and how should that be used in the future. But I think all 5 members, agreed that there's a crisis here, and we should have this money available if this is something that Concom supports, and they would much rather prefer having the Concom support this and take the lead in it, than come down and saying, well, you know what, listen, guys, we're gonna have to just do this on our own because we need the money. So that's the long and short story, and I'm here to answer any questions. Meg, did I miss anything? Okay. So,
What was that you requested from me?
I just said if I missed anything, if there's anything she wants to add.
Okay, at this point, Alan, you started this discussion with saying you'd send something into Meg about, there was paperwork that apparently been transmitted. I don't have a copy of it.
I sent it to you. I copied in the last email, I sent you her explanation. The question I had was where the initial 135 came from,
Okay.
and that was in the old software.
Right.
So, because there was some confusion, because the 135 is a minus number, and then the 480 is the plus, and we still end up with 616, so that goes against your common sense. You'd think that the 135 was the negative, and the 480 becomes the positive, so there would be those two numbers minus one another, so. But that's not how that worked. The 135 was what was put into that account within the old software system that Meg doesn't have the records on how much per year. And my comment is that we got to 135 with a 5-year hiatus from the time of its inception, and then exponentially exploded from there on going forward.
So it really shouldn't be listed as a negative 135, because it's
Well, there's a
positive.
it's a financial software.
It's one of them weird bookkeeping
that's-
things.
Okay,
That is,
It's called
For you, but-
municipal finance, so it's reverse.
Okay, but when you're dealing with the general public and with people who are not financial experts, it should be listed as a positive 135 unfortunately, for
well,
our
I think
information.
Alan just wanted to pull.
I wanted to know, that's.
Because now it looks like we're overdrawn 616,000, because it's a minus number.
Correct.
So it goes against your,
Yeah, it's.
believe me, I had the same comment to Meg. I said, how
I
come
could give you-
we lost 600,000?
Okay, I could give you a book in German, I'll tell you what it meant, but you may not agree.
So,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, there's many people that still struggle with municipal finance rules and regulations. You're absolutely right, it's not written in English, but that's just how it is.
so we're really not overdrawn $616,000.
now,
The reason this came to me is because of the two hats, because there was a FinCom issue. And obviously, I've been made aware of where we're going financially in the town and the things that may have to happen. It's funny, because I've spoken with a couple of my creditors. I talked with Kubota Finance, because I just bought the new machine, and we got into a little, kind of a long-winded discussion about Kubota's here to help out the contractors that have the equipment. They obviously don't want the equipment back, so they'll gladly give you 3 months off And I said, well, what happens when Kubota runs out of money? Who are they gonna go and ask for a bill? You guys have bills to pay. And she said, for right now, she says, you know, you're the only one that's really, and since she's been doing this, you're the only one that's asked that question. She said, it's a really good question, because there will come a time when the people that are holding the notes don't have funds to continue doing their own business. So I think this was just we saw this as a way to further shore up the reserves that are in the town, because we don't know what we don't know, especially with this whole thing. Is it going to lift on May 4th? Is there going to be a miracle on May 5th and everybody can just go back to their daily lives like nothing ever happened? I don't think so. I think that we may get a lifting of parts of it, but how long will it be before we get back in the swing of things? I know the moment I go back to work, I'm 3 weeks from seeing income. So that puts me out to the end of May. Meg?
I just wanted to add to that, though, that we're gonna be taking hits from multiple directions in terms of revenue, because and motor vehicle excise is built on the value of the motor vehicle. So if you've had people that have been out of work for a while, and we've seen motor vehicle excise go up like that, because the economy's been doing so well, but now, and we saw a dip in 2008, so motor vehicle is gonna get hit. Real estate and personal property are guaranteed, but it doesn't mean that people will be paying. We will probably see a lot more properties go into tax title, which could end up going to tax foreclosure, which it doesn't necessarily mean we're not still owed the revenue, that we won't eventually collect it, but we will have a cash flow issue, because we won't be collecting.
That's going to be the whole problem.
State
It's gonna
aid,
be
like
cash
Michael
flow.
mentioned, is gonna be reduced, so we're taking hits from multiple directions, and that's, and it's not going to be like, when the stay-in-place is lifted, it's not gonna be an immediate, because
Right.
you're gonna have people that are going to have to take care of their reserves and their home bills first, and they're not gonna be going out and eating, so meals excise, the meals tax is gonna take a hit for quite a while.
Well, that would take 30, 60 days to catch up to us anyway, from the time the
Yeah.
restaurants reopen. There's a time lag in there before
It's
that
usually
revenue.
90-plus days.
Sure.
So, I mean, this is not, we're taking hits from multiple directions, and it's going to take a while. Probably, I mean, if it hits a full-blown recession, it's not even gonna be 3-4 months. It could be a couple of years before we see things coming back. Maybe not as severe, but, I mean, I think for even a period of time after this lifts, it's gonna be pretty severe.
One of the things that Meg, myself, Alan, the Board of Selectmen do is that we're proactive in our finances. Where we foresee this coming, we all know it's coming, we just don't know the impact that it's going to be. And so by making these changes now and potentially doing some furloughs, it allows the town to better weather the storm. And that's what we're asking to do. And, you know, again, I'm going to go back to is that, you know, should there be a piece of property that you guys want to purchase in the future and you haven't identified any right now, and that's okay, but if you identify something, is that in the future, we'll still have 3 sources to acquire that land. Again, through the General Stabilization Fund, through the Capital Outlay and Debt Stabilization Fund, or through the CPC Fund for any type of sizable purchase. And that doesn't include if it was a huge thing of a buy and all make pieces land and you wanted to go out and bond for that, you could still do that too. So this doesn't really take away the ability of doing that. It just adds another step if you want to buy property in the future, because now it's no longer 3 people's decision. You have to ask permission from town meeting to do that again. But there will be sources in the future for that to happen.
Right, well, I wonder whether there should be written into the documents arranging for this transfer, an understanding that an effort will be made to revitalize this fund. In other words, in the future, that money will be set aside every year to gradually build this back up.
So let me ask you the question, is that you can't put that in the legislation, but it doesn't mean the town couldn't commit to that. But now the question I'm going to ask you is, to what dollar amount? What dollar amount should it be? I mean, when this was having $100,000, $150,000 was like the blue sky version. And all of a sudden, with fast forwarding 15 years and solar projects happening, now it's grown to $600,000.
Yeah.
What is that dollar amount needs to be? And that's why I'm suggesting leaving in $116,000, because I think generally from what it is that you would normally need to do, that's more than adequate to keep you guys going, should you find something. But again, I'm giving you three other options to fund a big project that you could do in the future.
Isn't that basically the cost roughly of one house lot, though?
But again, are you buying house lots or are you
I'm
buying?
just saying the amount of land.
Right.
Because it was in there for land acquisition.
Right,
And so 116,000 is really just one house lot, basically.
that is correct.
So that's really not much.
Again, let's go back and look at how the fund's been used over the last 20 years. It really hasn't, to buy much, through this fund. And again, what's the need? And I'm giving you multiple sources to still purchase larger than 116.
Well, we did need money very badly to purchase the coal property.
Right.
And luckily, Sarah was able to finagle, I guess it was Audubon, to make.
With Autobahn CPC funds.
Right.
Yeah, because we
It was
played,
mostly
well,
Audubon, $2 million.
there's a lot of CPC funds because we paid for that for about 10 years.
Okay.
Yep.
But the whole thing is that if we'd had this money available, that could have also been put to that then, and something like that. Now, we may have to buy land for a South Carver well system, South
Yep.
Carver municipal well. I think that's been talked about, hasn't it, at a time?
I haven't heard that, no.
No?
No.
Why would conservation be buying that land?
No, not conservation, the town, but, well, the conservation bought the land because they had the money available.
On the coal property?
Okay.
Yeah.
But even if it was just 116 in the funds, I think what is being said though is that if you needed more than that for another plot of land, that there are 3 other avenues in
Right.
terms of.
There are.
In order to get.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that will involve going to town meeting, won't it? To transfer.
Oh, well, and I guess that's part of the
And
question
That's a lot
too.
harder to get money out of the 500 people at that town meeting with their tight pockets.
Can I just jump in with that too? So there's a law that says that when a donation is made to the town, that the Board of Selectmen have to accept that donation, because whenever some equipment or something is donated
Yeah.
to the town, there can be associated costs, hidden costs and so it is the Board of Selectmen saying, we accept this. And so I think that this is something that is similar, is that, if you buy a plot of land, there could be other costs associated with it. So it is almost something that you want to be a transparent process, so that residents would know, we're buying this property, but you buy the property, but then there could be things that you find upon inspection
I'm sure.
of it. So I think it's in the best interest of the town to make it a transparent process, for the same reason that the Board of Selectmen have to vote on all donations.
Yeah, and Jim, I think, we constantly are saying here is we think the Conservation Commission should have a role in this process. But you're dealing with a 20-year-old law and setup compared to what today is. And should 3 members have the right, if we had to bring this to town meeting today, and we were setting this fund up brand new, and we said, okay, we're now going to set up this fund that the conservation can use. Can we transfer $600,000 into that fund? I would argue that the town meeting today would say, hell no, because there's no checks and balances. We'll put the money aside in a stabilization fund for future acquisition, but it's got to come back to the legislative body for spending such a large amount of money without checks and balances. So that's the piece that I would just put out there.
Well, if the town does not have control of the money at that time, it's not going to then damage the town so much.
Well, also, could that be something that would be included in the capital plan, though?
It could, and let's not forget, this is still town money. It's just the town meeting
Trust.
no, it's not a trust. It is not a trust. Don't use the word
Oh, I'm
trust.
sorry. Psychologically, it's a trust
Yeah.
for land acquisition. That's the whole idea.
Right. And town meeting at one point in time voted to allow this fund to be set up.
Right.
And what I'm trying to do is, instead of trying to have town meeting take it away from you, because in today's time, that's probably what they would do versus doing furloughs and layoffs, I'm trying to have it so you guys can rethink this and figure out what's best for the town and kind of lead this from a proactive standpoint.
Mr.
And
Chairman?
I think my point though too, by saying it would be on the capital plan, is that the capital plan is one document, and it tends to, it's not like, I think it could possibly be maybe a little bit more difficult process if it was a standalone article, but if it's part of the capital plan, and this is something that has gone through several different approval from various bodies, then I think it's not something that's going to be challenged so highly at town meeting. So I think that if that matters at all, I think that as part of the capital plan and endorsed by several different parties, it's far more likely to pass. It's not something that would be challenged.
Michael, I want to add a question. You're saying three people would make the decision on this.
Majority vote.
Okay.
You three.
It'd be the Conservation Commission as a whole, though, that would vote on it. That's 5 people, okay.
Yeah, but you don't even.
You could have a 3-2
Could
vote.
pass it with 3,
Right,
Yes.
but it is the whole commission that would vote on it.
right, but it would require a majority vote. So technically, 3-2 would win it.
It is still the commission that would vote on it.
I don't disagree with
Let's not
that
talk
statement.
about the 3 people. Let's talk about the 5 people that would vote on it.
Okay,
Yes, 5 people would vote on it. It only takes 3 to pass it, but 5 people would vote on it. You'd have 5 people potentially authorizing $600,000. Now, again, as I started this presentation, is we're trying to be proactive. We know the storm's coming. The storm's already here. We don't know the full financial impact of that. We are going to be discussing furloughs and potential layoffs. This transaction, should you support this, would potentially delay that for some period of time because we wouldn't have to be as harsh with that because we'd have some more breathing room. Not that we would use all this breathing room up on just keeping non-essential employees there, but it helps. It helps. And at the end of the day, we're looking for your support and leadership on this. My job, finance director's job, is to provide options to the town executive body, which is the Board of Selectmen, to how best to weather the storm, and this is part of our plan.
Okay. Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I got a lot of questions.
Sure.
First of all, through my, I guess, naivety, what's the difference between a furlough and a layoff?
So a furlough and a layoff, technically nothing from an unemployment standpoint, so you can still collect unemployment plus the additional $600 that's available today. However, a furlough is you intend to hire the employee back. In addition to that, we would probably keep them so they would maintain their seniority from a union standpoint, and we would probably keep them on their benefits, their health care benefits.
Okay.
So they would lose their salary from the town, still maintain their benefits, still maintain their seniority, be able to collect half of their salary plus $600 a week through the federal government. And in essence, what that does is that saves the town half of their salary.
Right, okay. All right. You used an example of the town wanting to perhaps purchase some property on Sampson's Pond. And it can be John's Pond or Muddy Pond or anything. Let's say that there is a piece of property that comes up that we as a commission are made aware of. And we think it's a great idea for Carver. We think it's got potential for open space or town space as an adjunct to something that's already there, or maybe standalone. And it's available, and the seller says, I need an answer by Monday. We're not going to have town meeting that quickly. What do we do in a situation like that? When that money, we have to make a decision.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you can't. You can't make a decision that quick. Okay? And here's why. Because you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to get an independent appraisal on the property. Even with this fund, you still have to follow procurement law. That procurement law for acquiring land requires public notice, how you go about doing that. I'm not here to talk about the details of that because I'm not prepared for that question. But what I am going to say is there's a process you have to go through, which includes appraisals on the property, which includes legal review, title research. It's impossible to buy something in a handful of days, or probably even in a month plus.
Okay.
But you can have a town meeting, a special town meeting, in a 2-week period, should this be that critical to have.
Okay, all right, that sort of answers that question. But that you run into the risk of a special town meeting that is specifically for that purpose only, of not having a quorum,
Correct.
and losing out on this.
Or the town, because it didn't get a quorum, says, well, we don't want to buy it. That's the legislative process that's there, is it's taxpayer money, and if the taxpayers aren't going to show up, you can read into that many different ways.
All right, is there Is there a way, I understand that you're, not you personally, but the town's, and I probably would feel the same way too, of putting a lot of responsibility on a board, on this board, to be able to spend that kind of money. And I get that. Is there a way to put additional checks and balances on that, short of going to town meeting? Of having it go through other boards?
So depending upon what the dollar amount, I would say possibly. And let me give you the possibly example, is that there are two other funding mechanisms in between town meeting. They're both reserve funds. They're managed by two different bodies and a combined body. The first is the Finance Committee's reserve fund, where they have $125,000 to spend and act as a mini town meeting in between town meetings. In addition to that, we have the Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund. And the Capital Outlay Committee, since I've been here, has anywhere from, let's call it $500,000 plus on average. Now, it's not just that committee, because town meeting voted from a checks and balance standpoint. And again, a town meeting vote is that the Capital Outlay Committee can recommend to fund something out of their funds. But it takes a second vote from the Finance Committee. So then you take the 3 to 5 members of the Capital Outlay Committee and the 11 members of the Finance Committee, you get 2 boards voting on that. So both boards have to agree to release those funds. So depending upon what the value was and what it was, there is an interim process, possibly based upon where that is from a funding standpoint.
Why couldn't we set something up with conservation where we have that same power of going to Finance Committee and getting their 11 opinions?
Well, the answer
As
is,
part of
sure.
the second vote.
Yeah, so what I would say is that would, when I presented today, I had 2 recommendations, 2 votes. One is just this pot of money of 500, and the second is how do you want to do when you go forward with the rest of the funds? I think you could put that as part of the second piece, is that if you kept it like it is today, and you still had the roll-off funds coming in there, and as Jim said, you had a cap in there that it would be a certain dollar amount, you could go to town meeting and say, okay, we're going to accept a cap of, I'm going to make a number up, $250,000, and anything above that rolls into the general stabilization. And if we're going to spend the $250,000, not only we'd have to follow the same process the capital outlay does, is we as Conservation Commission recommend an expenditure out of that $250 to the Finance Committee, and they can approve it between town meetings.
Yeah.
But again, I've done 2 things there. One is, or you brought up one and Jim brought up one, is you put a balance in there, the check and balance. You've added that by having another board voted through town meeting. And the second is you put a cap in there as to how much is too much money. And if you put a cap on there and anything rolls over to that, then you have a cap in there. And I think that's fine. I think that's a perfect solution for the second vote that's there. And again, you don't have to do that tonight, but I think that's a fair thing to do.
Okay,
Can I just throw a point in there though too, beyond just the rollback taxes, is that this is, because it's called a trust fund, we have it with a bank that's called Bartholomew Trust, they handle all our trust funds. So this account is collecting interest, so even if you were to roll back to about, like, what are you talking about happening against the balance, like the
116.
116? So I mean, this account started with 135, and when the account was at 135, it was earning interest per quarter of about $400. So I mean, there is like, if you left it with the 116, you'd still be accruing funds in there.
That's a good point. And go back to the trust thing, Jim, is the reason why we have it in our books as trust fund is because the treasurer keeps this money aside separately. And it's not something that's drawn on a regular basis, so we can put that into 3, 9, 12-month CDs, knowing that it rarely is drawn from, so we can get better interest on that. That's why we have it labeled that way.
okay, on this document, the 2-sided document, are each of these entries a single payment or a single?
No, because if you look at it, the ones that are actual true rollback tax collections, it's labeled as rollback because it goes to the general fund and I have to do a journal entry. Anything labeled as treasury deposit is interest.
All right, so the reason I'm asking is that there are 6 entries that make up 420,000 of the 480,000.
Yes.
But those 6 entries, for instance, the one from June 30th of 2015 of 94, almost $95,000, that is multiple rollbacks in one?
That'd have to dig, that's a matter of having to like drill down into the software, because some months we will have more than one rollback tax calculation, sometimes it's just one. So to answer that off the top without going to my software and drilling down into it, I can't answer that.
Okay, because they seem to be few and far between, these huge amounts of money.
Well,
Correct.
If you turn to the second page though, once you get to September of 2019, that's when you start to see multiple hits.
Okay,
And I know that right now, we're sitting on 2 more rollback tax calculations, and with each solar project that's approved, that's another rollback tax.
all right. So I'm wondering, I understand that, you know, I get you're saying that you want to put a cap on what we have. Is there a bottom on things that we receive? Let's say that any rollback tax or any tax that comes in that's more than a single payment of more than $15,000 goes into the general fund.
The answer is yes, it can be designed that way. You know, again, I'm just picking off of what Jim said.
Right.
You have some flexibility there as to what you want to do. And at the bottom line is, you as a taxpayer, as a resident, and assuming you weren't sitting in this position, how much control and authority do you want each board to have? What type of parameters do you want to set up for them? Right now, there are no parameters, none.
Right, I get that.
And we're talking about putting 2 parameters on, a check and a balance, and then a cap, or a bottom, or whatever it is. However you define that value, it can be defined 20 different ways.
Right. I'm just thinking a little bit more longer term. As the town grows, it's going to be more and more important to protect wetlands areas. And, you know, some of them are just plain wetlands, which are probably gone at regular market value. Others are waterfront, which draw in a greater cost to purchase those. So, you know, just bearing that in mind is why, you know, is keeping it a relatively healthy amount in there in order to make a decision if something that comes up that we feel initially is a good idea for the town, and giving our reasons for it. Maybe, and then that goes to finance and maybe even the Board of Selectmen before any kind of a decision is made.
Sure.
As opposed to waiting for town meeting, in which case we may lose an opportunity, or people who are not impacted by it would, you know, if they're not going to take a walk in that piece of property, they're not going to want to pay for it.
Right.
So,
I mean, I'm going to just go back to the Atwood property on the Sampson's Pond, because everybody knows about it, and it's going to be redeveloped to something. You know, if hypothetically, somebody said that, okay, that property is for sale for $900,000, and the town can buy it, and, you know, they can take a tax write-off. There's benefits for people selling land to the town for Conservation Commission, because they can sell it below value and take tax credits too. Let's say the number was $1 million, okay? That's such a icon property to the town that I would argue that you can go to town meeting and go out and borrow that money through a bunch of funds to pay the $1 million, not in cash, but you borrow $1 million and you pay it back over 5 years through a bunch of different funds to buy that, because that's such an icon of the town. I would argue you're going to get strong support for that if you had the ability of doing that through a purchase agreement. So again, it's the real big projects, Savory, that are important to the town. I think the town would back it up.
okay. I agree in something that's as iconic as that, and something as in your face as that. But, you know, there may be something on Muddy Pond.
Right.
That, you know, people don't even know there is a Muddy Pond in Carver.
Correct.
So, you know, we would probably know about it, and we would probably have gone on a site visit and seen that there's something that we felt was worthwhile for the town, either as natural open space like the coal property, or to develop it with hiking trails, et cetera. But, okay, most of these large amounts of money that have come in are solar, correct? that you're thinking? Okay. Now,
Particularly for Makepeace.
all right. With the advent of dual use, the growers, farmers retain their 61A.
No. Depends. Let me take back the no to depends. The law says, and we've had big conversations with DOR because we don't like the law. The law says if the farmer is going to use the power for their property, it stays 61. But if they have a Borrego or somebody like that come in and do the project and sell that power off-site, has to come out of Chapter 61. I've argued at DOR that that's wrong because I look at the solar is still land banking the farmland, and I'm going to take Mr. Paddock's property over here. He's still allowed to farm his land even under those solar panels compared to the new dual use. So if they're going to sell their power off-site, they should be able to stay under 61, but today they can't.
Okay, I'm surprised to hear that. I thought it was,
I am also. It's news to me.
yeah.
I don't like the law, and again, for my justification, I look at solar is still land banking the land, it's not turning into residential development. They should still get the same benefit of the Chapter 61 until it leads into a permanent use. So solar is a temporary use of 20, 25 years.
Then what's their impetus to do that?
The state,
No, the grower. Why wouldn't you
get
just
paid.
go with the traditional? What?
They get paid from the solar company.
But you get much more, you get much more generation of power if you don't go that way. If you just do a traditional, because the things are closer together. If you're not getting your 61A removed, why not just say, okay, I'm taking this parcel of land, I'm gonna clear the trees and put in regular solar?
Maybe they're hoping for the change in the legislature.
Okay. I'm surprised.
so I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just gonna say there's
All right.
smarter people than I that have figured that out, that it makes sense for them to still do it the way they're doing it.
All right, well, okay, so that, where I was going was that these big numbers would, if that were the case, would probably come down.
Not until the law changes.
Right, but as I said, I'm surprised that the law is like that.
Yeah.
Okay,
And again, in 2002, solar wasn't on the table, that we never thought we were gonna have these big numbers.
right. Yes, that's true. Do you know if any other towns do what we do as far as having the
I do not know nor have I done a poll. I'm gonna surmise, and this is just an assumption, and you know what happens when you assume things, but there's probably a handful of towns that do something similar to what you're doing. There's many that definitely don't do anything like what you're doing because they want that to roll into stabilization or back into the operating budget. I would argue that that's probably the vast majority of towns. I would also say that of those that do what you're doing, are they big solar towns? Are they having this this elevation of cost or revenue that was unanticipated? I would say probably not. But again, I haven't done a survey to justify that. I'm just giving you my professional knowledge, Meg.
I mean, I know that the assessing office gets calls from other towns all the time because we're considered to be the big solar town, so I know that most are not. I mean, in terms of, from an ideal standpoint, I mean, in some cases, it would help having the rollback taxes stay in the general fund because it would go to free cash, but the thing is you can't build a budget off of it because it's so unpredictable. Like this, 1 year you might have 3 huge payments and then the next year you might have none. So, I mean, it's not something that you necessarily do want, and I think maybe that was,
Yeah.
could have been where it's.
Her and I would never recommend that it go into the general operation budget, to the general fund.
Or you couldn't.
Well, you could.
You could. It
You
actually-
could. Some towns would do that.
It would be an absolute nightmare.
Well, that is true, because they're gonna have the peaks and the valleys. We would always argue that it goes into a stabilization fund because it's a one-time payment.
That's right.
And you use one-time payment for one-time costs, land acquisition, equipment, buildings, whatever it may be.
all right, this money, this $500,000 that we would give would just go into the fund and to be used in an emergency basis like anything else?
So my proposal, and again, I'm trying to do this as a collaborative effort by everybody, is, my recommendation to you is that you would authorize it to request that it be transferred to the town's general stabilization fund. The town general stabilization fund today has just about $3.2 million into it, $3.180 million into it. That fund only can be spent by town meeting, only can be spent with a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So it really is used for emergencies or one-time projects.
Okay.
So it's controlled, it's not just gonna like roll over to the general fund.
Right. So if we come back to, and here's an example, okay, is that we're hopeful that through the FY '20 budget that we're in right now, that we're gonna get less revenue, but we should have some less expenses, and we have some money reserved in some other allocations that we can cobble through this year. You know, we may need to do a little bit of cutbacks, but not a lot. However, when it gets to next year, we may need, I'm gonna throw a number out, and this is just, because again, we don't know, so I'm just gonna throw a number out for discussion purposes. We may need $1 million to subsidize the budget next year. Now, the recommendation for the $1 million would only be if it's a one-time purpose. So if we truly believe this summer, when we finally have a town meeting, you know, and actually this would probably take place at a fall town meeting, because I do anticipate, because of this crisis, we're gonna pass the budget as is, implement an immediate spending freeze, analyze what the numbers are, and probably in November or something like that, have a special town meeting to adjust the budget. Let's say when we get to that special town meeting where we find out that we're gonna need $1 million to get through FY '21, but all signs are FY '22 is gonna go back to normal, then in that position, the town meeting may say, you know what, let's take that $1 million out of the $3+ million that we're gonna have in stabilization and move into the general operating budget, and they could do that with a 2/3 vote.
Okay. Jim touched on this a little bit. Let's say we're a year out after the governor lifts all the restrictions, and it looks like everything's, heading back to whatever the new normal will be. Is there a mechanism, or could there be a mechanism in place to start replenishing back into the conservation fund, which you said we haven't touched in 20 years?
Right.
So, should this happen again? It's there.
Right. So the answer to that is at a future town meeting, and hypothetically, the general stabilization fund still had $4 million in there, and we're supposed to have 3.2 based upon our financial formulas to have 7.5% of our operating budget in there. That if we had over the 7.5% still left in our stabilization fund, a town meeting could vote to move money out of the general stabilization fund into the trust fund. It could make a lump sum payment back into that. The other thing is that, I would also argue the fact that if you find that special property and you have to spend $500,000 on it in 4 years from now, you're going back to town meeting. It's like, hey, guys, remember, you've got money in your general stabilization fund. It came from us, and we need to buy this piece of property, and here's why. There's a bunch of different ways to spin it.
About 1 in 10 million.
Well, I don't know about that. Again, if
Oh,
it's
what,
an
three?
icon
3
property,
million?
you could do it, or, Savory, to your point, is that's if you were gonna transfer a lump sum back. But if you guys decided, listen, we always wanna be able to grow the account to X, like we have revolving funds. And how much is the earth removal revolving fund? You can find it faster than I can. I have to put my glasses on.
$191,000 right now.
Okay, so we have, in town meeting has authorized, I believe it's $200,000 for the earth removal. Jim, you're on that committee. Is that, they get payments from all the growers. We all know how that works. They can have up to $200,000 in their account. Anything over that goes in the general stabilization fund. But, when they get close to that, they knock on the door to John Woods and say, okay, we're getting close, what's your next priority for road reconstruction? let's fund $60,000 of that. And that's what they do. So you can put caps on this, and again, I'm talking out loud right now, you know, you could turn this into a revolving fund, just like we talked about, that it had a cap. And I just don't think $600,000 is the right number from a checks and balance standpoint. But I also could agree that more than 116 over time is too low. The question is, what's that number in between that you could do there? Is it $200,000? Is it $250,000? And can you build it up to that account? I don't see an issue with that. Provided you had the checks and balance, you know, and you had two votes.
Although
that had to be done.
if you did move it to a revolving fund, it would lose the interest. It would not accrue interest.
Okay, so,
Okay.
so I'm using right, but from the idea of a revolving fund that has a cap on it like that, use that idea, but because we want to invest this money, because you're not going to touch it too often, we get better returns on it than a revolving fund.
Right. Well, I mean, I can see, you know, putting a cap on it, and doing what the earth removal does when it gets close to that cap, saying, okay, we've got money here, you know, for you to use for something.
Yep. Or you don't have a project, and you just, anything over $200,000, $250,000 just goes to the general stabilization fund.
It could be that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a project to buy that's worth for the town to acquire, you don't buy something. And
Right.
that's been what's happened lately, is you haven't found something. Again, I think we'd all like to buy some of the property in Sampson Pond, but it isn't available in an arm's length transaction yet.
Right, okay. But I also, I think that that could be done in combination with the, you know, setting a bar for large-scale deposits. You know,
Yep.
single deposits that automatically don't get put into our fund, so that it takes longer for us to build this up. So that we're not coming back to you every 6 months or a year saying we're almost at our limit after a while. Because if you look at this, really, there's been $60,000 over the last 6 years, if you take away the six
Six big ones.
big ticket items.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's, you know, that's fair.
Okay.
I'm surprised about the dual use.
Yeah, trust me, I
Gotta tell you,
had.
that's,
I had a big debate, and DOR and I were on the phone for like 3 days, things, all the way going up to the commissioner. And they agree that but that's how they have to interpret it until the laws change. Now, I will say on this, just as a follow-up, is that our state rep did file legislation along with others to change that. It hasn't passed yet, but the Board of Selectmen voted to support a change in legislation so that the growers could sell it on the open market and still maintain their 61.
That's right.
So we did ask for that to happen, because again, I thought it was wrong, and our state rep followed the bill for that. Our state senator, I think, signed on it as well, and the Board of Selectmen voted on that.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a carrot other than just getting the money from solar, because they can almost double their solar wattage by doing a traditional as opposed to a dual use.
Right.
Okay.
I think that that's all that I've got.
And Savory, again, I'm trying to have this as a collaborative thing, so we're all comfortable with whatever the solution is. I've made 2 recommendations. If those need to be modified, they need to be modified. But again, we're looking at we're being proactive on the pandemic that we're dealing with and figuring out what makes sense for everybody.
Right, but one is a today vote, and the other is let's put our heads together and
Correct.
come back to that.
Unless you want to vote on both today.
I
Don't
don't
push
think
you
that
off.
I don't think
But, I mean, again, I throw it out, it's your choice.
I might as well be the guy that says it, don't push Eli.
I'd like us to be able to, you know, kind of look at some options.
Yeah, perfectly fair.
I'd like us to hash out the logistics of the whole thing,
Yeah.
and I'll bring the insight of FinCom also, so that we can look at it.
Do you have to?
I don't have to, no.
I'm kidding.
I can stay home that day if you'd like, but
No. I welcome in FinCom's.
I think that, I'm sorry, Dan hasn't opened his mouth yet.
I just had, you answered some of the questions before, in terms of the functionality of the land fund. The wetland fund, is a separate fund that we use for association fees and things of that
Yeah,
nature.
it's nothing to do with it.
What else would we use that fund for?
Anything like trail signs, The little plaques that we have, the no disturb. We've used it for, I think we've also used it for consultants.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
When we hired Lenore and, yep, those people
Yeah.
to review the NRADs, things like that, so
Okay, and how is that funded? The,
that's by the
It's
filing
that
fees?
piece, it's the notice of intent, like part of, like, it's a filing fee with the state, part of it goes to the state, part of it stays with the town.
okay.
Yeah.
Pizza parties, birthday
Yeah.
parties.
Yeah, Dan, I may have confused that situation. I think I combined those earlier in my earlier presentation, but you do have the wetlands fund, which is from the permits.
Right.
And then you have the conservation fund, which is, a separate thing. So there's two funds, wetlands and conservation.
Yeah, as I'm morphing my decision tree in my head, I'm thinking about some comments that Savory made in terms of long-term ramifications as to what we could potentially afford down the road, as to what land may be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and so forth, but also some of our our proactive near-term goals that we have. So I just want to see what we have for what purpose each fund can be used for, so. That's all I've got for that. And I think there's some things sounded like somebody said we're gonna have some type of executive discussion on that.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I'm just going to bring it from more of a moralistic standpoint. And having having the ability to have sat on FinCom, I think that for a appointed board of 5 to have oversight over what could potentially, if we said no, if everything we say, if tonight it's no, you can't have anything. 616 stays right where it is, the same money keeps getting shoveled into it every year, potentially 2 years from now, we've got $1 million in that account. I think it's not fair to the town that 5 members on a board should have complete control over that fund with no oversight. I just don't think it's right. We wouldn't expect that out of the Capital Outlay Committee. That's why we bring in the checks and balances of the FinCom. The reason why the FinCom doesn't have that kind of power is we don't have that kind of funds. Even the selectmen can't spend that kind of money.
They can't spend any money.
Right. Well, there's a reason why there's a town meeting vote. I have no issue with this being capped somewhere along the line. I think that if this were to come before town meeting today, and this were to try to be passed today, and town meeting was informed that over the next 10 years, this kind of deposits would be going into it from what we now know to be the solar project.
Let's say this kind of money might be going into it,
Might.
because the solar activity is going to slow down to some degree. A lot of it's been built that could be built. We're at a logjam because they're going to have to put in probably 3 new major transmission lines.
But this
to
is
handle-
not one-time money.
No,
This is the taxes that are rolled back. Am I correct? This is the taxes that are rolled back annually going forward, funding this.
It's whenever, a rollback tax, what it is when you change the
Use.
use of a property from agricultural to a non-agricultural. So it's spurred by someone filing it's a right of first refusal that would start that.
Yeah.
And
It's a one-time thing.
it's
Alan.
a
It is a
one-time thing.
It's a one-time thing.
Yeah.
But to Jim's comment is, solar will continue to evolve. We're seeing more battery storage with solar. I am told by the solar folks that because the cost of the cells and the batteries and how things are coming, solar industry is not dead. Yes, do they have a transmission issue? Yes, they do.
Yeah.
But the batteries kind of solve that. That's the workaround from a transmission thing. So I don't see solar slowing down just yet. At some point, yes.
but I'm very much that, that battery thing now, that's been 2 years we've been
Because the
sitting on it.
state's arguing with them. It's not.
No, wait a minute, hold on, time out.
And
On that, when that went through, we knew it was gonna be a 3-year project before it went in the ground.
Nobody told us that.
Yeah, we knew that. That was, because they were ahead of the technology, waiting. They knew the technology was coming, they knew it was an R&D, they knew it was gonna work out. And they spent the millions of dollars they did pre-permitting and going through all the interconnect agreements with the National Grid and the Northeast Corridor thing in preparation for them to go forward next year. So that's
Okay.
that's been in the works. That's not a surprise.
Right, Alan, just so you know, I agree with you that the 5 people should not be the final word on something as large as this, which is why I suggested that FinCom or someone else be a second set of ears and voice. I just think that there could be an adeptness and a fleet of foot issue if we had to wait for a town meeting.
No, I agree with that.
So-
I agree with that.
So, I mean, I don't.
But I also know that a town can't do anything in a big, fast hurry anyway, so there would have to be, more to your point, if you were to say, listen, I'm moving back to New York, you want to buy my house and the
I'm not
land?
moving today, I'll tell you that much.
But the point I'm making is, you know, if you have to make a decision by next Tuesday, you got to find a cash buyer, because there's nothing, we can't do nothing with that.
Right.
Well, also, like, what if, I mean, if you have 116, you buy a plot of land, and that 116's gone, what's not to say that at the next town meeting, you have nothing on the horizon, but at the next town meeting, you do something to replenish that. So
Sure.
that you've got it again, so it's not, so again, so then the next opportunity arises, and you don't have to wait for town meeting, but the idea is to just keep replenishing it, so it's there for the next opportunity too.
Right.
Yeah.
Saban, if I could add to your question before about buying land, again, you have to follow a procurement process.
Yeah.
That takes time. But the other thing is, I answered your question as though it's just regular land in town. Again, we were talking about the Sampson Pond. If it's a Chapter 61 land, there are statutory requirements where the town has a longer period of time. I believe, and I don't know if Brooke, you know this, or Meg, I believe a town has 60 days to say we're interested. If they trigger that we're interested, then they might have, I think it's another 90 days or another 60 days to come up with the money. And because they said we're interested, that person can't sell that land and take it out of 61 until that timetable's done.
Right.
I may be off on the dates, but there's a two-step process.
Well, that's good to know as well.
Yeah, so you do have, and again, you can call a special town meeting in 2 weeks. So
Right.
that would be, you can't get through the procurement quicker than 2 weeks.
Right, right, I was just using that
Yeah.
as an example, but,
No, I
you know,
understand.
if something came up the day after town meeting,
Right.
no.
Because every time
How
something
long?
goes, comes out of 61A, we're always asked if we want to buy it.
Right.
Right.
Or if we, and typically we say no because we don't have any money, but,
I mean, that makes it easier for
Right.
for property that's already in
Right.
61A, but there may be parcels
oh, I see, yeah.
that become available that aren't 61A,
right.
but
Right.
that we feel as the first line of defense are important, or could be important for the town.
One of the other things that triggered a question as well is, you had mentioned there being, and this might mitigate some of our concerns too, as to what happens for the account long-term. You mentioned some type of replenishment mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to, is there an automatic replenishment mechanism? No, it would have to be something that, and this is the issue that you have if you have boards that turn over or employees that turn over, but there just have to be a way to codify it that, and I think what it is establishing that there's a threshold, a floor and a ceiling, you know what I
Right.
mean? So like if it goes below, if you buy a piece of property and it goes below the floor, then it's gotta be a conversation with the town administrator in terms of funding, okay, well, at our next town meeting, we would like for that money to be replenished, you know what I mean?
So right now, today,
That's the floor issue you were wondering about.
Right.
Yeah,
We would
Dan.
discuss that at our next meeting, that'd be the second part.
That's a second vote thing, I know.
That's a
I'm just-
second part.
Just
of it.
filling in my
The
notes.
floor-
but to answer your question, Dan, today, there is a replenish mechanism. And the state law says that any rollbacks go in here.
Right, so-
That's not changing until the state law does that, and I think we have 6 or 7 in the process of rolling back.
We do.
So there's more money coming in, we just can't calculate that today.
Well, rollback plus interest is still going in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, until you have a second vote and until that's codified, there is a replenishment mechanism beyond what you're gonna take out today, that by the time you do that, the fund will build back up to something. I don't know what that something's gonna be, but there's money gonna be coming back into that, until you change that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Could I make a motion, Mr. Chairman? Or do you want to? I would make a motion that we move 500,000 from this fund to the general stabilization fund, which would be leaving $116,036.25 as of today's date in this report, actually as of the report date, which would be April 6th, 2020. And that we, at a future meeting, determine the ultimate outcome of this fund going forward.
Is there a second on that?
Is your second part of the statement part of your motion?
Oh, I can separate it out if you want.
Yeah, let's just do the one for the 500,000.
Okay. Then I would then I'll take that part, I will make the motion that we'll move the 500,000, we'll authorize
You're recommending the
recommending the
500,000.
500,000 be
here.
transferred to the general stabilization fund. That's it.
I'll second that.
I gotta go to state law, I'm gonna have to cover.
And then we'll work out the
And
logistics. of it.
just for clarification, just to add to that, is again, as I said, the implementation is, you're asking the selectmen to do that, the selectmen have to vote
Right.
to ask the governor to do that, the governor's gotta ask the legislature to do that, the legislator has the vote, and then it happens.
Right,
So there's a process, this is the first step of that horse race.
okay.
So we have a motion on the floor, it's been seconded. It's been moved to transfer the 500,000. What's the, well, just 500,000 exactly?
500 exactly, general stabilization
To
fund.
the general state. Okay. Is any other discussion on it? I myself am not that sold on it yet. I'd like to have a little more time to think about it and conjecture whether I think that we should do it with a little more protection for the fund.
Well, we can get to that in the next motion. then.
Not after we give it all away, we can. That's my point. So,
Okay, well,
Do we
it's
have-
open for discussion, so.
Do we know how much is still in the process for the,
I don't because,
Principal assessor wasn't here today.
she wasn't here today, so I'm gonna say,
approximate ballpark?
I wanna say it might be like $5,000 right now. It's not huge money, but I mean, that's the one that's been presented to me, like the developer asked for rollback tax calculations. I don't know what else is in the pipeline.
Yeah, there's two other solar projects, solar logs. So, yeah, we don't have that number.
Okay, all right.
But again, it doesn't, you're on planning board, right?
No.
No, well, anyway, planning board, has other projects in the pipeline that are coming,
Yeah,
and anything on solar or anything on that's gonna trigger this, and that's gonna automatically go in there. So before your second vote, which would then go to town meeting, which would then be sometime this summer, which would then be going to the legislature, there's gonna be other ones that are gonna be coming online that will be sizable.
so anything that comes up between now and town meeting will go back in.
Goes back into it until changed.
Yeah.
And again, if you guys vote to say, listen, we want to have a cap of $200,000 or $250,000, it keeps on going at that point, until you get that trigger. All right.
I can build that into the same motion. I can amend that motion if it would make you feel better, Mr. Chairman. We can,
Well, let me ask this, Jim, what Savory's talking about is allowing money to go in there to build up to a cap, that's what you want to
Yes.
happen. You guys aren't ready to vote on that today because you want to discuss it, but clearly all four of you want that to occur.
Yeah.
So you are going to build up the fund, maybe not the $616,000 again, but to $100 or $200 or $250,000 number is something that's reasonable. And that would give you what you need to move forward, at this particular time.
I think no matter how we do this, if we're making a motion to move the 500,000, to recommend that the $500,000 be put into the general stabilization fund, which the selectmen and FinCom and the governor's office and Mickey Mouse has to get all involved in, and then it comes back, we can make the next vote can be that we want this fund to have a floor of $20,000 and a cap of $250,000, and then discuss a mechanism by which that can be achieved. So,
I'm not so sure we can.
sure, why not?
Well, if we've already transferred out the 500,000, okay,
Yeah,
then it's on its way, it's gone.
yeah, but there's still, it still leaves 116,000 in there, so we can
116,000.
vote on a floor,
Vote on the floor
and we
to,
can vote on a cap,
yeah,
and then there still will be funds put into it from what has not changed yet, and then we can bring the rest of that mechanism to town meeting as to how to replenish to get us to that 250.
Right.
Town meeting can sit back and say, hey, thanks for the memories. No, they can do that.
So Jim, this vote tonight isn't gonna stop the fund being replenished. You're still gonna have money going into there, and we still got projects coming along.
Okay. What do you think, Dan?
I mean, as of right now, you know, in terms of our long-term concerns, until we do any kind of second vote, there is no cap. And there's no changing in the refunding mechanism as of right now anyway. I think it would go a long way toward using these funds to help support the town, especially for our direct purposes, asking for something later down the road.
Absolutely.
So, you know, in terms of obvious need for cooperation with the town's needs and our specific needs down the road, I think it's a
It's positive.
As Meg pointed out, there've been an uptick in deposits recently. If you look at this chart, even from September of last year until now, there's been about $160,000 put into the account. And that's in 7 months. So, I mean, there's no guarantee that that's how fast it will rise, but it's certainly
It's an
a
indication
trend.
that it's, yeah.
But there are solar projects pending that have not come
Yeah,
online.
it's not trending down, it's trending up.
It's trending up,
So
there's no doubt.
And, you know, one thing not to, you know, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know. We all took an oath to serve this town. Our specialty happens to be in the area of conservation, but we're serving the town nonetheless.
That's right.
So this goes a long way toward doing that.
Right, but, you know, it could be just one person's opinion as to how best to serve the town, whether to maintain the conservation fund in its condition or to share it with the town stabilization fund. So, I can see both sides.
If we had used this fund a lot more, then I might have some concerns along those lines.
Yeah.
We haven't touched it.
Yeah, these are special circumstances.
There are
is the other-
people that Brooke didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
And we've got to get,
So-
we just got to get behind.
Kind of
this
forgot
kind of
about
emergency.
It's not like winning the lottery.
No, that's true, true.
You know, I've known it's been there. I didn't know how much it was, but I knew it was there.
Yeah, you seem pretty surprised when I talked to you.
I was surprised at the dollar amount because I probably haven't been aware of it over the past 2 years.
So I'm on FinCom, and I didn't know about this fund until it was brought to my attention, and I said, we got what? When I talked to Jim, he wanted to know if we had plane tickets to Aruba.
And, Jim, you can't use the funds for going to Aruba. You know, obviously Meg and I know what funds we have in different areas, and this is by far the largest fund that's in the town, that is ripe for using to help solve our financial issues that will be coming with COVID-19. And, you know, that's why this was identified, is that, you know, again, I still believe the fund's important. I still believe you should have money in there. It's just that, you know, as Savory says, you haven't used it. You know, how much should you have? You all believe there should be a capital in there. You probably all agree it shouldn't be $600,000. And so we know more money's going into it, and we're recommending or requesting that you guys spearhead releasing $500,000 out of that.
But we need to take a vote. So we moved and seconded.
Yes.
Right, and the discussion, I guess, is concluded, is that it? That's what we were doing.
Yes, it was your discussion. You
Yeah.
were the ones you were the one who had some,
Point to raise.
yes.
Okay, so, I guess we'll take a vote. All those in favor of the motion to, transfer the money to. Recommend, yes, because of course others have to vote on. I recommend the transfer of the money from the, land acquisition fund to, the,
General
General
stabilization.
Stabilization Fund for the town of Carver. Please say aye.
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 Aye. It's done.
Thank you for the unanimous
4-0,
vote.
1. No one will.
4-0.
Yeah,
Was there?
Yeah, there is no one.
Yes, there's Tim's on here.
Yeah, but you wouldn't count him because he's not here, so it'd be 4-0.
We have a quorum, so we're.
We have a
Okay.
quorum.
Right.
We have a quorum.
There was a high pitch vote in there, but there was 4 votes.
I would, just so we know, I think that we should take this up at our next, whenever this catastrophe ends, that we should really address this at the earliest possible convenience for the next conservation, or the following conservation meeting, whenever we can get together and get this put together.
Michael, what were you saying was probably going to be the town meeting date, 60 days after the lift?
3 weeks.
3 weeks after the governor lifts the ban is when the board would tentatively like to have a town meeting. We are gonna discuss trying to pick a date on that, but, you know, it's, best case scenario is gonna be in June, it could be in July.
Okay, so you'd want, we'd have to do a warrant article on this.
For the second vote, yes, you would, and you have some time to do that. I mean, certainly, we'll make sure you have ample time to do that. Your vote tonight will be codified, I think, by the Finance Committee when they meet next week, and the Board of Selectmen tomorrow, and have them begin the process of following the governor's bill for this piece. And this is the only piece we're talking about right now, and the rest you guys need to deliberate on.
Right, no, I'm just wondering if we should, consider having another, one of these meetings to discuss it.
I think when we get a little bit more information on where we're going, I think we'll know a lot more by the end of April as to whether this looks like this is gonna get lifted or not. Because if this gets lifted May 4th, and we have town meeting 3 weeks after that date, that puts it at the end of May. If they extend this out till May 30th, then that puts the town meeting out until the end of June. I know that Middleborough put their elections off until the last day in June, just preemptively. So, and we don't even know when our elections are gonna be at this point, because that's gonna be 4 weeks after they lift that date.
Right.
So we're at 3 weeks and 4 weeks is the numbers. And, you know,
As it pertains to a potential second vote, there are quite a few bullet points to discuss.
sure.
So I don't know if that's, executive session worthy first and then have a meeting, or if that's only open meeting.
I would entertain executive session,
I don't think it wouldn't qualify.
no?
Because it doesn't fall under real estate, it doesn't fall under negotiations. It's really a policy discussion, really what you're doing, and I think the conversation you guys are having on that should just be, continue with you guys.
Okay.
But no, that would have to be open session.
Yep.
I mean, what I would suggest is that,
Tim is in on it.
you may want to look to schedule a meeting in the end of April, even if it has to, again, you're a small group, so you can meet. If you want to do it by Zoom, you can do it by Zoom. And I mean, Brooke, do we have anything pending in the pipeline?
We had a meeting scheduled for next week, which we're gonna reschedule, I thought, to the first week in May. And see,
What's that regarding?
this would be for all the notice of intents that we have.
Okay.
How
And
many
I've talked
do
to
we have?
everybody, and nobody has a problem with
How
rescheduling.
many do we have?
3.
I'm assuming Andrews Point's one of them.
4 Andrews Point, Sarah Stearns is new one, the ANRAD, and 0 Nell Bunny.
What was the last one?
0 Nell Bunny
Oh, yeah.
for a house.
Yeah, so when you have your meeting in first week in May,
Yeah.
add this to the agenda. I
Do
think
that.
if you're having the discussion first week in May, even if we have the town meeting at the end of May, that still gives you a thing, because I think you guys have discussed it. I think you know the parameters you want a cap, and you want a checks and balance. Now you just gotta figure out what that's gonna be.
I was just thinking more in terms of the article, like formulating what our preferences would be, because there are a lot of variables.
I agree.
I think what you should look to do is not think about how to write the article, we'll have town council write the article. Tell us what your objectives are. If my objective is, oh yeah, we'll do a placeholder. The objective would be is we want to cap at this, we want to have a minimum of this, we want to have a checks and balance defined by us in this group. And you put those bullet points together, and that's easy for council to just write up a few sentences for the article to put it in context.
Right.
Yep, my concern was having make sure we didn't miss our spot.
Yep, we'll make sure a
If
placeholder.
we, well, that's why I asked for the placeholder.
Yep.
If we plan on trying to do a May 6th meeting, which is the first Wednesday in May, that's after the current close-down date of May 4th, so we'll know at that meeting whether or not everything's gonna open up, what's gonna open back up, we'll be better equipped to deal with it. If it is a shutdown of epic proportions, then we can still have 48 hours to deal with any changes for the agenda. So we could go forward and plan a May 6th meeting,
Yeah.
really, no matter how we cut this, and then leave that open-ended.
Tuesday, yes, 1 o'clock.
Okay,
You know, we could
you like that?
just throw it on, just to get something on the calendar, so that's the plan.
I'm fine with that. I think that what we should.
Meg, thank you.
Thanks, Meg.
Yeah, I'm good.
I think that what we should do as individuals is put together our own bullet points so that we're ready
Okay.
when we have this meeting. And
Sure, I'll have some input.
I think that whether or not the restrictions are lifted and whether our May 4th meeting is everything or just this article.
Yeah.
That we have it anyway.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So I got it in my calendar for May 4th, May 6th, rather, and
That's the first one, right?
that's the first, yeah, May 6th.
Right, and if the restrictions are lifted, we do it at our regular 7 o'clock. If it are not, we
Yeah.
do it at 3 o'clock.
Anytime, sure.
But that gives us a month to put put something down on
Yeah.
paper and come and see where we agree and where we disagree and come to
Yeah.
an agreement.
Excellent.
And just one point, again, the fund's a good fund. The fund has a good purpose. It was just created 20 years ago, and what you're doing is you're refreshing it to what it should be in 2020.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever designed to grow this big.
Right. And you got to make sure you get the checks and balances that are in there, and keep in mind, you still have 3+ other sources.
Well, there were things going on back in early 2000s
I'm not going to deny that, absolutely there were. Yep,
that could have resulted in some expenditure for the town.
yep.
That were looked at. But it all went away.
Right,
So, that doesn't mean it won't go back.
correct. Thank you all.
Make a motion to adjourn?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Brooke.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?